Check, check. Check 1, 2. Hey, 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 hey. Okay, looks like my voice is coming through. Let's see if the audio is coming through. Okay, we're good to go. All right, so last week we looked at basically let's change this layout. Yeah, that's better. We looked at the prep of this track. We looked at the drums, and we basically sorted out a lot of different things about the mics, what mics we were going to use, what the different mics sound like, how to set up phase for everything, setting the gains on your items if you want to change that. We did a lot of that stuff. And today I'm just going to jump into version 1 of this mix, okay? Provided with I also have the full mix here from Mike Senior, which I'm using for reference. I also have the prep, which is the previous project that I've bounced out with all the instruments. And I also have the prep for just the drums, okay? Because this is version 1 of the mix, and we are doing a drum focus mix, so I'm still going to be talking about drums primarily for the duration of this video. And as you can see, I don't have any processing or anything like that going on any of the other tracks. I do have plugins, but they're all disabled, and this is from my template. I only have stuff happening on my drum mix, okay? So first things first, if you are going to be doing this, mixing this, of course, do your cleanup work, clean up the vocals, clean up everything that you can, and color code stuff, make your regions and all that stuff totally helps. I'm just going to change the color of this, make that a bit darker so that I can tell the pre-choruses from the choruses a bit better. Yeah, let's just pick that. Okay, there we go. Okay, done. And yeah, so I'm just going to dive right into what's happening with this drum mix today. We'll quickly listen to the prep. This is the prep drums from the chorus. Okay, sounds pretty good. Fantastic recording, by the way, so you can do many different versions of this mix, whatever works for you. There are very few wrong ways to mix a great recording. Okay, and now this is version 1 of the drum mix. Prep, version 1. Okay. So immediately you notice it sounds a lot roomier, it sounds brighter, it has a lot more width to it. So I'm going to jump right in and show you where that's coming from. So that sound, that sort of character of the drums, and I can't stress this enough, it always comes from the distant mics, because that's always capturing characters, capturing the whole vibe of the drum kit. It's capturing the true performance of the drummer from an audience perspective. It's capturing a lot of the room. It's where the soul of the drum kit is. And in this case, it's going to be in our overheads and our room. I made a little folder for the overheads. I'm using the XY overheads as well as one of the paired mics. Okay, so what I've gone ahead and done is I do have another set of spaced pair mics here, but I have basically locked them and hidden them because I don't want to use those. I prefer the sound of this spaced pair over this. And this is, of course, it's been recorded by Telefunken, so a lot of the extra mics are just to showcase their different models and stuff like that. You don't need to use all of them. You can if you want to. Okay. Another thing I just want to point out is if you go to your folder that you got all the tracks in, you will find photographs of all the different recording setup. So this is the mics, okay, for the overheads. As you can see, you've got different overhead settings. You can't see everything clearly because, well, the photographs are kind of close. So this, you can tell sort of where all the drum mics are, for the most part. And you can see over here that, well, I don't know what this photograph is supposed to tell me, but yeah, you get the picture. And then we've got, yeah, this is the vocal recording. So I'm guessing the triangle mic on the right, these three mics, that's the lead vocal. These are background vocals. These are guitars, of course. The DI boxes that were used. And here you can sort of see the overhead arrangement. So we have like a spaced pair here. We have another spaced pair here. You can see they're very close to each other, which is why the spaced pair is essentially super in phase. And we've got this mic over here, which is the XY mic. It looks like a single stereo microphone, right? So yeah, you're probably wondering why there's only one mic here. That's probably because this is a stereo mic capturing in XY. And yeah, we have the closed mics here. Again, nothing fancy about it. Pretty standard miking techniques. And here we have a lot of mics on the guitar amp. Again, this is to showcase the different models and tones, not really meant to be used all together. So ideally, so this is kind of like a dynamic condenser setup, which is kind of standard for guitar amp miking. So you can use either one of these dynamics and one of these condensers together to get the sound that you want, or you can just use multiple condensers. Whatever works for you. Just use your ears. Don't worry too much about the names of the mics and all that stuff. You can do the research if you want, but when it comes down to the mixing, just go ahead and have fun with the mix. Okay, so that's also one more thing, just since we're here. The kick drum has been recorded with two dynamic mics. You can't see them very well. They're sort of right next to each other, and there's one condenser outside, and the front head of the kick drum has been removed. This reduces the release and sustain of the kick drum, kind of makes it a dry, very tight kick drum kind of sound. It's really nice for super tight sounds, but keeping that in mind, if you want a bit more sustain, you may have to process it to get it. And for the mix, what I've done is I'm using only one of these dynamic mics, and I'm using the condenser outside for the low end, because this guy is further away from the kick drum. It's going to capture a lot more low end, and it looks like it's a bit off axis as well. So it's gonna be off axis from the beater, capturing a lot more low end. So I'm going to using one of these. I'm not using all three of these mics. That's it. That's sort of a little bit of homework that you can do. You can just check that out. It's actually quite fascinating, the kind of things that they've done to capture this. I'm just going to jump right in. So the main sound of the drum kit comes from these overhead mics. So let's listen to them raw, and then I'll play it with the processing that I've done. That sounds pretty good. Now I'm just going to enable the processing again. Right? Okay, so that's really bringing out the character of the room. It feels like your it feels more realistic actually with the processing than it does without. Without the processing again. With. So with the processing, it feels more like you're in front of the drummer in that space. Okay, so what's happening here? Nothing much really. I've got a little high pass filter cutting off 60 hertz just because I could hear some rumble in there that I didn't want. And then I have a 1176. Attack is set to the quickest, release is set to the quickest. It's a pretty hard-hitting compressor. I'm going to disable the 1073. Let's check it out. Without, with. Okay, and I've got the blend set to around 40%. Now you can do the same thing with the 1176 that comes, 1175 they call it, that comes with Reaper. All you need to do is basically, You can set the ratio however you want. It's really up to you. I'm getting about 12 dB of gain reduction. Okay, attack is set to fastest, release is set to the fastest. I'm going to set the gain up by about 12 dB. And set the mix down to 40%. That sounds really good, actually. So that's 1175. We'll compare the two. Just match the gain. Okay? Switch that off. Go to this guy. This is a bit too loud. I'm just going to turn this down. Yeah, so this is letting some of the transients through the mix, which is kind of nice if you want that sound. If I was using this, I would probably use the blend a bit more, maybe go up to 60%. Yeah. Okay, and they both sound really good. I prefer the PSP Fet Presser because it's got a bit more, what do you call it? It sounds stickier to me. Like, you know, it's really gluing the whole sound of that thing much better. But you can totally use this and it works just the same. So I'm going to just leave that in the chain. Maybe leave it around 50%. Maybe turn the maybe change. You can also try one of these if you want. I kind of prefer that. Maybe take the threshold down a little bit. Where's it? This is threshold's at 36, right? Let's see if we can get a bit closer. This is 10. That's a 20. So I'm not getting the release I want. I'm not getting the attack time I want because it doesn't. This has got a faster attack and faster release. I just don't have that here. And this is actually just doing about 6 dB of gain reduction. So that's kind of weird. So they don't quite work the same. So for the rest of the thing, you'll have to sort of do it by ear. So I can't quite get these to match, but again, the point is you can get similar results. Okay, so don't focus so much on plugins, because even if you got like a different 1176, 1175, or man, I'm just confused with the numbers now. A different 1176 from a different manufacturer, say Waves or something, they're not going to sound the same. All these compressors sound different. You can also use Rocket from Stillwell, whatever works for you. But the point is, I'm killing the attack on this. Okay, I'm totally destroying the attack. That's the point. So if you know what the concept is, you can do it in multiple different ways. You could do it with 1176 or a really fast compressor. You could even use Recomp. Actually, Recomp works very well for this, not Ria X. Let's go. Recomp also does a great job of killing transients because I can get this to be, you know, at 0.1 milliseconds and get that to like 10 milliseconds. Give it maybe 8 over there and see what that sounds like. This also sounds really, really nice. Right, and you can mess with the RMS to kind of get a more like QB kind of sound out of it. That also sounds great, actually. Compare that to this. They're peaking at the same level, actually, you know? So the peaks are at the same, but Recomp is so much louder because it's really squashing the transients. So you kind of would have to mess with the gain here. So I don't want it to be that extreme. Maybe I just want 6 dB, so I'll change this. That looks good. Much snappier there. Nice. Recomp is way louder in terms of how much it squashes it. So I might actually keep this in the chain, use a bit of this later. But again, the point is, what you're trying to do is you're trying to kill the transients. Okay, so compression is one way to do it. You could also use the transient controller to do the same thing. You just reduce the attack, bring the sustain up, see what that does to the sound. Right? Has a very similar effect. Very, very similar effect. Has great. Actually, this sounds really good too. So I might just leave that here. I might use a touch of it later as well. So recomp, I like that. So spend time listening and comparing different compressors, different transient controllers, whatever effect you're using. If you have multiple versions of it, compare them, because when you're working on mixes like this, you really want to experiment as much as possible, because you don't have a deadline, you're not working for a client. You want to have fun with these mixes as much as possible, right? And really get to know your tools, because the more you know the tools that you have, the faster you'll be able to get the sounds in your head later on, right? So go back to my original chain. I'm using 1176 and I'm using a 1073 on top of it. This is just basically a very wide EQ. I've got 5.5 dB boost at 4.8 kilohertz, and I've got a 3.5 dB shelving cut at 110 hertz, right? So let's listen to what the EQ sounds like with the compressor. Without, right? It's kind of muddy. The cymbals are kind of getting lost. So, and also the snare is a bit too fat. So I'm just using the EQ there to even that, balance that out. Right? That's it. It's two plugins. A simple, we're killing transients and we're brightening the sound. That's it. That's the idea. So don't focus too much on what frequencies I'm boosting or cutting or whatever. Just think about what you want to hear with these mics, and then you can figure out how you're going to get there. There are many, many different ways to get there. So let's say I did the same thing with recomp, or whatever, stock plugins. Let's just do this with recomp. I'm not going to try to recreate what I have in my chain. I'm just going to use this to I'm going to want to kill the transients, make the room sound bigger by reducing the transients, and then I'm going to brighten the sound. That's it, right? That's the idea. So I have recomp, I have transient controller. I'll probably throw in an EQ afterwards. See how far I can get with that. Let's see if I can cut this even more. That's pretty nice. Little too snappy for me, so that's nice. Okay. I'm going to use transient control on top of that to make the room even bigger, but not so much. There we go. Okay. There is a 1073 plugin that comes with Reaper. I'm going to use that. Right. I do really like the curves the 1073 has. It's 4.8K. Let's give it a 5 dB boost. 110. Let's give you a minus 3 dB cut. Minus 4 dB cut. This boost is a bit too high for me, so maybe I'm just going to go a 3 dB boost. 2 dB boost. This is really nice. Okay? That's stock plugins. Achieving the same effect. You know. And then these are paid plugins. Right? So, so you can do wonders. These stock plugins sound really, really nice, actually. They sound really loud. It's the same peak level, by the way. It's not a different peak level. As you can see, we have the same amount of headroom with the stock plugins. In fact, we have more headroom, I think, with the stock plugins as opposed to the paid ones. Yeah. So you're actually getting more headroom with the stock plugins, and it's louder. So this is really squashing the sound quite a bit. It's a nice sound. I really like it. Let's see what that sounds like in the mix. Let's go to the previous chain. I would probably just take this down a bit. Right? Okay, so both of them work. One is a lot more aggressive than the other, and it depends on at this point it's a matter of taste what you want to use. I actually really like what these are doing, but I'd probably tone them down a little bit. Also, recomp. Also, we're using a wet-dry blend over here, which I'm not doing with recomp, so the compression sounds a lot more extreme. So I'd probably use a dry-wet blend, probably just use the dry signal, put the wet signal in a little bit, and just reduce that, mess with it a little bit. Basically, spend time, with this concept. Don't worry too much about what plugins are being used. All of them sound fantastic, and they all do interesting things. So yeah, that's basically the overhead. That's the concept. Focus on the concept. Kill the transients, make the room bigger. That's what we're trying to do. That's not a go-to thing for every overhead miking that you might hear. Some may be fine just the way they are. They may just need a little bit of EQ, whatever. Think about the character you want to impart into those mics, or you want to bring out of those mics that obviously already exist in them, because you can't make something sound a certain way if those qualities aren't present within the recording. So that's all I'm doing here. I'm bringing out the sound of the room. I'm taking down the sound of the drums. That's it. That's all I've managed to achieve. That I really, really like where this is, and this is the main key thing in the drum sound. Okay, let's listen to these drums. And if I just disable this, the whole drum mix falls apart. This is the soul of the drums, the overhead mix, right? Obviously, it's not going to be the case for every single drum recording that you work on, but 90% of the time, the soul of the drums comes from the overheads in my or some distant mic, in my opinion. Okay, I have never managed to achieve a mix that feels good without getting the overheads to sound right. So that's it. That's what I have running on the overheads, right? So I'm going to avoid the other mics for now, and I'm going to start looking at the closed mics. So, of course, the first mic I want to look at is the kick drum, first set of mics. Let's listen to what this sounds like. I'm going to disable the parallel processing. So this is just the kick drum mics. And as you can see, again, there's not a lot going on. I've grouped them into a folder. Let's disable this. Let's listen to one mic at a time. Let's listen to the U47. Right? It's a nice mic, nice recording, great low end on this. That's what I want to, bring out. So all I have going on, first thing is I just have an EQ with a bit of a low end boost. Right, I'm going to disable everything else. That's it. Just an EQ boost over there. And then I have some transient control. You can use transient controller to do the exact same thing. I like using transient master because it sounds a bit more, it sounds a bit smoother to me. In fact, this is my favorite transient designing plugin that I've used. I've used quite a few. There's also a much more expensive one from SPL called SPL Transient Designer, which is based on the actual hardware version of this, which you could buy. It's very expensive, but in my experience, I find that the Native Instruments plugins actually for this sound better. There are also a lot of free Transient Designer plugins available. You can just Google them and you can find that, or you can just use Transient Control that comes bundled with Reaper. Again, thinking about concepts here. So what I'm doing is, if you pay attention to this kick drum, okay, this is disabled. There's a bit of a resonance in the kick. It's almost like a note that you can hear. Let's see if I can just bring that out. If you can hear that note, that resonance, it's sort of in the tail of the kick drum. But I don't want to EQ anything out. So what I'm doing is I'm just reducing the sustain, because I want more attack on the kick anyway. Reducing the sustain over here to sort of cut the resonance. So it's a much tighter kick sound with this, as opposed to that. Disabled, enabled. So I'm just tightening the sound of the kick, increasing the attack, reducing the sustain, just tightening it. Got a bit of an EQ boost. The trim plugin, again, doing nothing, is just there. So that later, once I'm happy with this mix, I can bring all my faders to unity using the trim control. That's it. I have done like two very, very simple things. I've got a 3 dB boost at 50 Hertz, which is the sub frequency of the kick. And I've got some transient designing. That's it. 2 plugins. I've got the exact same thing going on here for the this is the U47. This is the big condenser mic I showed you, which was off axis outside the kick drum, and this is the mic that was on axis in front of the beater, closer to the mic, closer to the inside of the kick drum. So it's getting a lot of attack. Let's listen to this. So it's got a lot of attack, obviously. It's got a bit of this 200 Hertz resonance, which I'm cutting. Let's just enable that. That's it. Nothing else. And I've got Transient Designer again, doing the exact same thing, but to a lesser degree. That's it. Let's listen to these two together. Okay. Without. With. Very subtle, right? Just tightening it a bit, adding a bit of bottom end. That's it. And then I've got them grouped to a folder, And the folder has another EQ where I'm sort of cutting this resonance over here. So it's cutting on both the kick drums at the same time. It's a pretty deep cut, but we're going for a rock aesthetic, right? This is a rock song. So rock aesthetic, generally you don't have a lot of mid-range in you have, like, in the drums you have a lot of low end, a lot of high end, sort of bright drums with a scoop in the middle. So I'm trying to get that sound over here, so I'm just cutting the lower mids a bit. This is also kind of where the bass is going to lie. Remove the EQ, right? So, and I'm just boosting the lows on both of these, just gently with a shelf. Without, with. So this EQ makes a big difference for me. And I've got another EQ on top. This is an SSL EQ. You can use any EQ to do this. The SSL EQ, I like the curves on this EQ because they tend to be a little sharper, which is nice for drums. I don't like to use this EQ on a lot of things, but I'm using it here because I kind of like the way it boosts the highs and cuts the mids. Again, I'm not doing anything on the EQ. I'm just boosting 6 dB at 2K, which is sort of the attack of the kick drum. So let's bring that in. Without, with, very subtle. You can do that with pretty much any EQ. And of course, I've got Voxengo Tube Amp. This is a free plugin. You can download it from the Voxengo website. I'm just adding a bit of distortion. It's very subtle again to the kick, so that because I don't like compressing kick drums, I'd rather use distortion on them. Why? I just like the way distortion sounds as opposed to compression. Yeah, essentially, this is just dynamic control. It adds a bit of low-end harmonic as well. Makes it sound kind of like it's going through a tape, but I don't want to get too, I don't want to get too wine tasty about this. I just dig the way this sounds. That's about it. And it's a free plugin. You can get it off the Voxengo site. It's a really, really good distortion plugin. Without, with. There we go. Okay, that's our kick sound. Let's, again, it looks like I've not done much, but once I disable everything, you will see that actually makes a big difference. So this is without any processing. And with all the processing. Much tighter, much more like, it feels nicer. It's got to feel good also, the kick, because the kick and the snare, the kind of the driving force of this song. So it's got to really, really feel good when you hear it. It's got to make your head bob. And I feel like this is going to do that in the mix. So let's listen to that in the context of the whole drum mix. Is something else playing? Oh no, it isn't. It's just the drum mix. Okay. I'm going to disable the processing on the kick. There you go. Again, in the mix, very subtle, but it just makes it pop a little bit more, makes it a bit more consistent, okay? And again, like I said, all the magic is happening on the overheads, right? That's where the main heavy lifting is happening, so you don't need to do much anywhere else, okay? Snare, high pass at 60 hertz, bit of EQ, that's it. I'm boosting a bit of the highs around 4K. I'm cutting a bit of the lows, low mids around 400, 500 hertz. That's usually where the snare is honky. So I'm just trying to brighten the snare, make it a little bit more snappy. Doing the same thing for the bottom mic. That's it. Bottom mic has a lot of boost in the highs, and I've sort of blended in a little bit. So I've got a 8 dB boost at around 3K. It's a shelving boost. So a lot of boost over there. Really wanted that bottom mic to be nice and bright. And I'm blending that in. So we'll just quickly go through that. Listen to this with the EQ, then without. Without EQ. and width, right? Just making it brighter, make it sound a bit more upfront. And of course, in the context of the mix, making these closed mics cut through a bit more and not make it too bottom heavy, too honky over there. That's it. Okay. Again, I've barely touched the. I'm not using hundreds of plugins. I'm not doing crazy numbers of things. I'm just making informed decisions, and they're actually pretty small steps, all coming together. That's making this drum mix work. We've got the ride again. There's nothing happening on the ride. It's flat. I've got a bit of I've got a high pass at 60 hertz. That's it. And the room mic, I have a bit of a cut at 200 because it's a bit heavy. It's a mono room mic, and I've got the same processing I have running on the overheads on this mic as well. That's it, and a high pass at 60 hertz. Not much going on, but of course, since this is sort of complementing the overheads, I've got the same kind of processing without the brightness EQ. This is the room with the processing and without. Right, same concept, just making the transients quieter, making the room sound a bit bigger. I'm not a big fan of this room sound anyway. I might do a bit more to it later down the line, but for now it works, and this is good. So this is sort of the starter. This is tier 0 of the mix, right? This is just sort of we're getting started. We're putting things in place. We're getting the general palette of the drum sound. Spend time, okay? So what you're seeing here, what I've done is not the first version of this. I tried a bunch of different things, and then I landed up with this. It's not like I immediately had the idea and I landed with this. I tried a bunch of different things, and of course I did that out of the class because it took me a few hours just to get there, and I'm obviously not talking the whole time, and it's and of course I'm not doing it continuously, so I'm taking a lot of breaks and then coming back and all that stuff. So obviously I've done that off screen, but keep in mind I didn't hit on all of these ways of doing it immediately. But in my head, I'm always thinking I need to find the simplest way to get the sound I want, and the simplest way to get the sound I wanted was to just crush the overheads, and crush the room mic, and just be gentle with everything else, right? It's something I do actually quite often with drums, but more often than not, it tends to work. Okay, but here, of course, the next step is the parallel processing I've got going on here, which is kind of the seasoning on top of this dish, and it's a big part of what makes it like taste really good. So we've got a nice like roast chicken going on, and I want to add some herbs to it, some thyme, some rosemary, whatever, garlic and all that stuff, which really adds a lot to it if you think about it. I mean, you could just roast a chicken, put some salt on it, but it's all the other stuff that kind of really brings it to life. So here is the parallel processing, and I wanted a lot of attack from the kick drum. So what I have going on is, again, I have a parallel transient master, which is receiving the U47, interestingly, which I found sounded more interesting going through that. Logically you would just use the mic that has more attack, but I found that this sounded better to me. So it's receiving that. It's full attack, a bit of sustain cut, gain compensation. I've got some EQ, which is just going crazy. Again, this is parallel, so you can do crazy things like this. You can't even see where this EQ ends. I've just gone nuts with it. Just boosting the highs. And I've got M Saturator. This is, again, a free distortion plugin. It is free, but please upgrade if you can make this disappear, blah, blah, blah. Whatever, dude. I don't have that kind of money. So basically, it's a free plugin. You can download it from Melda Productions, M Saturator. I'm using the clipping mode on this to basically just clip the transients. It's a very hard, limity kind of distortion, and I'm using two of them, one after the other, to really drive that home. So let's listen to this with one by one. We already know what the kick sounds like, so I'm just going to bring in transient master first, then the EQ, then the distortion. Right, so let's... Where is this at? This is at 20, right? Okay, so I'm just going to actually take this up. So remember where that's at 20. Okay, that's just transient master. Without, with, right? So we're just getting the attack out of the transient master. EQ, this is going to go crazy. Right, so now I can start taking that down. Just so that we're not cutting our heads off. So the EQ is really bringing the highs out. And then I've got clipping. So I can start taking this down some more. And I've got more clipping on top of that. So this is an absolutely nuts parallel process that's happening on the kick. But in the context of the kick drum, we're adding tons of attack to the kick. Right? And you can listen to that in the context of the mix. Think of it as the kick drum being 10 feet away from you without the parallel processing, the transient designer, and the distortion, all that stuff. And with it, it's like in front of your face. Okay, so this is without. Distant, far away kick drum. And with. Right in your face. Right, kicking in your teeth. So again, these things, they sound insane in solo, but we're using them in parallel, so you have the liberty of kind of going nuts with this. You could also do this with a sample or something, but this is a great recording. You don't really need that. It's fine. Then I've got a parallel compression. I don't really have a good reason to be using this, but it was there in my template, so I used it, and I kind of like it, so I'm just using it. This is kick and snare parallel compression. So I have an EQ, which is basically doing nothing. I have a gate, which is just cutting the sustain off the kick and the snare. And I've got that running into a compressor. You can use any compressor you want, but the concept behind this is I want the attack to be to come through. So I have a slow attack, fast release, and I'm also using the punch setting on this, which basically makes the attack a bit more attacky. And I've got an EQ post the compressor, just boosting things I want to boost over here. I don't know why I'm boosting 300, but yeah, let's just take a listen to that. So that's both kick and snare going through this compressor, because I want the compressor to sort of react to the groove more than just the individual kicks, right? Maybe that's better. Yeah, I think that's better. And I'm also just making it a bit brighter with the EQ. Right? So that's blending in as well. Adding a bit more bottom end and consistency to the kick and snare. Again, subtle. I've also got transient master on the snare, so I can control how much attack I want in the snare. I can just bring this up and down to increase the attack of the snare. That's it. Nothing fancy. Transient master plus, again, clipping. Very subtle. I've got some snare reverb. Snare reverb, again, there's a lot happening on this reverb chain. So I've got pre-EQ. I've got a gate because I just want like the snare to just trigger the reverb like a very 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 short hit. I don't want the bottom end of the snare and all that stuff getting into the reverb. And I've got a bit of post EQ as well, and I've got tube amp. I've got a lot going on here, so I'm just gonna quickly break this down. Let's just listen to the reverb without anything. Right? Sounds good. It's a plate reverb. I really like this from Sound Toys. You can, I think it's not a very expensive reverb. If you want to pick it up, it's actually quite nice. But it is Sound Toys, so inexpensive is kind of subjective. You could just use an impulse. You can use kind of any reverb really that you like. It doesn't really matter. The concept is not here. It's in the other stuff. I'm not doing anything here. There's a low cut on the reverb that I've activated. I don't know where it's cutting. Let's see if, oh yeah, 93 hertz. So just till about 100 hertz is where the low cut is going. That's about it. There's nothing else happening on the reverb. It's a half a second reverb, which is pretty longer than I'd want, but it doesn't go any lower, this reverb. So okay, whatever. Right? Nothing fancy with it, but it's too low mid heavy. It's like very boxy. So I've got an EQ going on here. This is pre-EQ. Just cutting all of that. Immediately making the reverb brighter and nicer. Let's listen to it without the reverb. Without the EQ. With the EQ. Much brighter, much more like manageable sounding. I like that a lot. Then I've got a gate, which is basically just cutting off everything apart from the attack. Without the gate. Right? And then I've got post EQ, which is basically just cutting the low end that the reverb is bringing into the signal. Again, effectively shortening the length of the reverb. And I've got tube amp at the end to sort of, again, control the dynamics overall. And tube amp has a low pass filter, which I'm using to make the reverb a little bit muddier, bringing back some of the warmth of it. Yeah, I like that. I could maybe dial that back a bit. Yeah. And without any processing, just the reverb. And with the processing. And I'm just going to use the trim to compensate for that loss in volume, which I have not done. Yeah, okay. Without. With. So all I'm doing is essentially just processing things going in and coming out of a reverb. That's it. This is, again, it's not uncommon. It's very, very common to do this when you're using reverbs, especially things that are kind of limited like this. But you can really, really shape the tone of the sound. Other ways you can also mess with reverbs. You could also use a transient designer after a reverb to reduce the tail if you don't have control over the tail and things like that. Yeah, so let's listen to that with the mix. Really bringing out the size of the drum kit with just that simple reverb. And bring the kick attack in. Maybe a bit too loud. Take that down a little bit. That's nice. Yeah, I really like that. Okay, cool. Let's go back to our prep. This is prep drums. This is basically the same. There's just the drums without any processing that I did in the prep. right? Also make a note here. We've not changed the peak values, but it sounds a lot louder. Basically night and day. And I've just sort of begun messing with the drums. I've not done a whole lot here. Actually, if you think about it, there's just very, very little going on with these drums. But that's more a testament to how well they're recorded, as opposed to how much processing I'm doing. So again, you don't have to do a lot. It sometimes it may feel like, oh, I need to do a lot to show that I'm a good mix engineer or I'm a good producer or whatever. No. And I've said this many times before, the more you understand the craft, the more you'll be able to achieve with less. And that's really the hallmark of a good mix engineer or a good producer, is knowing what not to do, knowing what you don't need to do, and knowing why you're doing something. That's very, very important. Always keep that in the back of your head. Okay, before I just play this in the mix and I show you how much of a difference these small things make in the context of a mix to the mix itself, right? I'm going to show you one last thing. The toms here, I've got the toms, I've sliced them up, right? But I do have my classic low pass filter trick going on here, which is, it's not my trick, it's Tom Lord. I picked this up from Tom Lord Alge, who probably picked it up from someone else. I'm making it sound like I met these guys. No, it was from a YouTube video. But it's a great trick. It's one of I hate toms. I hate editing them. They're just such a pain in the ass. But this makes life so much easier. Basically, in the tom sustain, and even in these toms, the toms actually sound really nice. The bleed isn't too bad, except the floor tom mic has picked up a lot of the ride, which I don't like. But without this plugin, you hear the cymbals. I'm just gonna turn that up. Yeah, I don't want that. So I've got this plugin that basically, and I've got some automation running on it. It's just a low pass filter that's cutting the highs on the sustain. And you no longer have cymbals. Right? Just check that out. That's dope. And I'm just using the pencil tool to draw these things in. So you can use, just use Command or Control on Windows, Command on the Mac, and you can just draw them in. That's exactly what I've done. And voila, no more cymbals. But you get the low frequency sustain from the tom. You're not cutting that out. Because if you just gated it, it's going to sound like shit. Don't just gate it. Do this. This is the best way to remove cymbals from toms that I have come across. Okay, so now let's just listen to the mix. Let's just listen to the other instruments. I have zero processing going on anything else. I've just selected what mics I want on the guitars. That's it. Apart from that, I'm not using any processing at all on any of the other sounds. Everything is disabled. These trim plugins aren't doing anything. No parallel processing, as you can see. Every single thing is disabled. So just listen to everything else. Then I'll bring the drums in. Sorry, that's too loud. I stand outside in the rain. I take the physical pain. At the end of the day, the girl's what I want. I'm going to bring the drums in. This is with the processing that we have going on so far. I stand outside in the rain. Okay, that sounds great. Now I'm going to mute the parallel processing on the drums and remove all the processing I have on the individual mics. And forget about the drums when I play this to you. Listen to the whole mix. Just listen to the song, because right now we're not focusing on the drums. We're focusing on the song. And what you need to pay attention to is what this does to the rest of the mix.
Stand outside in the rain. I take the physical pain. At the end of the day, the girl's what I want.
Okay, and now once again with all the processing. Oops, sorry. Don't want these guys. Let me just do that once more. Let's disable all of this and mute you.
Stand outside in the rain. I take the physical pain. At the end of the day, the girl's what I want.
Okay, now with everything.
Stand outside in the rain. I take the physical pain. At the end of the day, the girl's what I want.
It is almost as if you're listening to two different mixes. It changes how you perceive all the other instruments just because I have some processing going on the drums. And this is actually, it's really, really cool to me to hear, because I actually rarely work on drums before I work on everything else, as I've mentioned to you before. And this is interesting to me. So it's making me think, why are the drums making such a huge difference to my mix? Why is it making everything else actually sound better? What is happening here? Even though I'm not touching anything else, the fact that I've just gotten a drum mix that I like, it's not finished to me. I still have a lot of work to do, but gotten it into a ballpark of what I like is making the mix sound closer to complete, even though I haven't touched anything else. And this has given me a lot of food for thought. I'm going to be thinking about this for a while. I want you to think about this too. And when we meet up in the next class, we're going to discuss why mixing one set of instruments, like, why mixing drums has made the rest of the mix sound better and fuller and sort of given it more focus. I'm not being distracted by the drums, oddly enough. It's not like, oh, the drums sound super hyped and super focused, and now everything else sounds like crap, which is usually what happens when you mix one thing. But in this case, it seems to be having the opposite effect, where the drums are just making everything sound better. And I want to know why. I honestly don't have a good enough answer for this yet. So think about it, and we'll meet up in the next class.